one of the things I had to learn was when people asked me to help me with something, I like my instinct to say no, 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 I can do it. You just enjoy and relax the party or relax and enjoy the event. But that actually doesn't help build a community or build relationships. So allowing them to help when people feel helpful, they feel more connected to you. And when I let them do that, I also feel more connected to them and I help them. So part of that was when I needed help, I would just ask for help, even if I felt like doing it myself. When they asked to help clean up, I would say, okay, yeah, you could do this, you could do that. Or can we bring anything? Yeah, bring this, bring that. Even though I want to provide everything, it's that part of that is they feel more engaged in that group if they can help provide stuff for it, as opposed to just a consumer, right? Instead of just like they're not going to movie theater, they're actually part of this event. And so creating parts where people can really participate and uh, and what's that word? Participate and contribute and be a member of it, the more they'll feel connected to it, and they don't have to feel like just like a customer of that event.
Happy Fridays, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the weekly Wuzzle. Today I am joined by Chris Wong. Chris, I do not want to share anything about you myself. I would leave that space for yourself. But before we start with anything, Chris, how are you doing?
So far, so good. I'm doing so far, so good. What about yourself?
Doing well, struggling with new parenthood, to be really honest with you. New
Oh,
parenthood is hard. My daughter is 7 months old, and
uh,
it doesn't get easy. People say it gets easier when she turns 3, but by that time, hopefully, we want to have more kids. So
oh,
I think, to me, Chris, you know what bothers me a lot is this was also one of the things that I discussed in the past conversation with some of my guests is the longevity of life because I did not realize how long it is since I had a kid. Because when you don't have a kid, you don't really care about it. You're like, you know what, I'm living
yeah,
life. But once you have a kid, you realize, okay, for the next 10 years, Ahad, you probably are going to be still changing diapers, right? Probably. And
yeah,
that thought scares me.
yeah.
That is quite a long time to be changing diapers.
Well, I have a 6 and a 2-year-old, so congratulations. And I'll tell you, it doesn't get easier. It only gets harder forever. And people say it gets easier because physically it gets easier. Like you get more sleep, so it actually makes it a lot easier to handle things.
Yeah.
But it gets more mentally and emotionally taxing because then they have their own wants, they have their own needs. My 6-year-old daughter like has started throwing like really intense tantrums where she'll open the door and say she's gonna run away, or she's 7, I should say. So it just gets harder to manage those things, and you're like, what do I do? I don't know. I have no idea. And so yeah. So I don't want to break this to you, but it only gets harder from here.
It only gets I think those are things parents and society tells themselves just for the sake of you having kids and you don't get
Yeah,
discouraged by the first one. That don't worry
yeah,
about it, it's gonna get easier. Just have more kids. We need it for the economy. So
yeah.
I really enjoyed that conversation because you know what? I've actually run away from a house a lot as well when I was young. Not at 7, but at 10, at 12, at 14, just because you
Yeah,
always
yeah.
think like you know better than everyone around you. So you want to
Right.
run away all the time. But bringing the conversation back, Chris, where are you calling in from?
I'm right outside Boston. I'm a little bit south of Boston, but yeah.
Okay, okay, from the States, basically. And you're
Yeah.
telling me the weather there is good in Boston right now.
So it's 50 degrees today, which is really good because we've had like 2 months of like 30 degrees, 20 degrees. And so it's been like freezing or below freezing. So finally
Ooh,
it's warm. So it's a little bit nicer. I just walked outside just right before this, before without a jacket, and it was nice to walk around.
wow, without a jacket. Okay, so I'm calling in from the Netherlands, and
Oh, okay, very cool.
this place is known for its shitty weather. It's
Mm,
like people come here for the money, people come here for individual success, but the one thing they would wish they could change is the weather because it's so rainy. It's a bit like the UK. It's always raining.
yeah,
It doesn't snow much. It doesn't shine much. It's just perpetually rainy. So
so
I don't know,
interesting.
it is interesting and I really enjoy it because I come from a very hot country in Pakistan. That's where my roots
Okay.
are from. So I moved here like 5 years ago,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm still enjoying the rain because yeah, in Pakistan, the south of Pakistan, you don't get much rain, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So
yeah.
for us, this is still a dream. Whenever it's raining outside, I just try to go outside for a walk, get myself a little bit wet, and come back inside. I
Yeah,
haven't
yeah,
gotten
yeah.
tired of it yet, but people are. So I always get a little bit envious whenever I hear my guests talking about good weather, walking out without a jacket, because I'm like, hey, here we need to gear up a little bit because it's always going to be like that.
That's so interesting. I used to work for somebody that was from the Netherlands. She grew up there, and she never complained about the weather here. Maybe
Yeah.
that's probably why.
Maybe that's why. Indeed, indeed. Well, that's great. So, Chris, today what I want to talk about is I want to talk about conversations. I want to talk about communication in general, and
Mm,
it is quite a difficult topic because it's quite a broad topic, right? When you talk about communication, it's everything and anything, right? Because we as humans are
yeah.
social species. So if I had to ask you the most integral points of communication, like the 101, how would you begin?
I would say it's got to start with listening. Number one, first and foremost, you got to listen because words have different meaning for different people. Um, and a lot of times we're not really listening to listen, we're listening to respond. So we're listening to just, I want to say my piece, or I want to share about my thoughts, or I want to fix a problem if it's our partner that's like complaining about something at work or her day, and then I just want to fix the problem. So we're not really listening, we're just trying to wait for our chance to speak. And so I think that's where it starts is there's so many things going on, so many things that distract us. We just have to learn how to listen, which is a lot harder because it means we have to stop wanting to talk.
It's it's actually very very difficult because I did some education in these things like courses to become a coach or to become a communicator, and the first
Yeah.
thing they teach you is listening, and
Mm.
it was so difficult because you want to prove yourself, right, Chris? And I feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this podcast for me has been such a good exercise because when you are interviewing someone, you need to listen. You need to listen to what they're saying because that's what you're going to pick up upon to ask the next question. If you're not
Yep.
listening, you are basically going to be talking next to each other rather than talking to each other. So
Exactly.
you tell me that we always try to listen to respond. You tell me we always try to listen not for the sake of active listening, right? Not for the
Hmm.
sake of learning, but actually just to show what we know. How do I break down the barriers, Chris, of people who are so interesting, but they sell themselves short because they're always trying to talk over someone else and they're always trying to show who they are? I know they're interesting people,
Hmm.
but they're lacking that. And you know, you can't tell people that you're lacking something. So how would you have that conversation?
Let me clarify. Are you saying how would you coach somebody to be a better listener, or how would you kind of in your personal life persuade them to start listening more and
I think
stop
it's
trying
more
to talk?
personal. Yeah, I think it's personal. Like just like your
Yeah.
colleagues, everyone has difficult people around them, right? And no one has access to coaches. But I really believe in the
Yeah.
democratic power of getting people equipped with the skills that they can have these conversations rather than having to go to a coach. So, what would be your 101 in that sense? That if I have to have
Yeah.
that difficult conversation with someone to showcase my needs, to showcase what I can do, where do I begin?
I would begin with preparing what is your goal for the conversation. I would begin with, do you want them to ultimately have a behavior change? Do you want them to just change their perspective? Or do you really just want to vent at them like, you don't respect me, I don't like the way you're doing this? That's a goal. That's not going to change their behavior, but it is still is a goal.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes we mix up the two, so we think we're going to vent at somebody because it's going to change their behavior, but it doesn't. Nobody's going to change their behavior because you yelled at them.
yeah,
So it's about what's your ultimate goal, behavior change. And so what does that look like for you? What are the things you need to see in order for them to behave differently? Like, what is the specific things that they stop talking as much, or that you're allowed to finish your thought completely?
mm,
Whatever it is, you got to be able to really clearly define it, because if they're interrupting you, if they're not respecting your voice, they won't know what that should look like. They'll just do what they know best. That's their
yeah,
natural
indeed.
instinct. So it's clarifying for yourself, what does that look like? What do I need? And then understanding what's the impact on me. Instead of trying to worry about why you're doing something or why you're saying something, just worry about, this is what you're doing, and that, it hurts me because of this reason. I don't feel respected, or I
Yeah.
feel hurt, or I don't feel heard. Whatever may be, focus on the impact as opposed to the intent, and don't worry about that. You'll If you are willing to have a good conversation, you can figure that out during the conversation, but you don't need to stress yourself worrying about that the whole time.
That's quite interesting. I really like how you mentioned goal, right? What is the goal of your conversation? Because a lot of times people really don't think about the goal when they go in. They
Hmm.
just go like, I want to see where this goes. And sometimes that might not be the right decision because you want to tread carefully, especially in the things when you're talking about behavior change. When you're talking
Yeah.
about an action you want someone else to do, it really needs to be well thought out of. Now, what I've realized in my experience, Chris, is people don't want to hear their flaws. They want to
Mm.
hear what's wrong with them. They might be hurt about it, that oh my god,
Yeah.
I'm causing someone else pain, but it's a no go to change someone from the
Right.
outside. How do I basically tackle that? So yeah, we talk about the goal of the conversation, the intent behind it, the impact that comes out of it.
Mhm.
But will that be enough if they want to close themselves off? How do I have the conversation?
Well, I think that's one thing I always talk about is it's just natural. Like you have to expect that that's going to happen because it's that fight, flight, or freeze response, and we all have it naturally, right? Every time we feel a threat, we're either gonna lash out, we're gonna fight, or we're gonna flight, which is run away, which will just be, we try to disengage from the conversation. We'll just say less and less. We won't even try to engage in the conversation anymore. And so the goal of setting up the conversation at the beginning is can you maintain your own reaction so that you're able to stay in control, but can you reduce the fight, flight, or freeze response as much as possible for the other person? And you can by setting up ground rules at the beginning, being very clear at the beginning with how you start the conversation so that you're setting it up so that it is an open conversation, and also
Yeah,
being clear right away from the beginning what you want to talk about. Because I'm going to use a work example only because this is like the most clear example of this is
yeah,
if a boss, when a boss used to say to me, Chris, can I talk to you? I immediately think I'm getting fired today. I think lots of people feel that way. Like I just immediately
yeah,
go to that. So like that vagueness will make the other person's head start going through a million different possibilities. Like,
yeah.
hey, if I say to my wife, hey, Katie, we need to talk. She's immediately just going to start thinking about what's happening? What did I do? What's going on? So that's not great. That doesn't start off the position really well because they're already going to be defensive. So
Yeah.
it's finding a way to start that conversation in a way that's gentle and clear and also helps create a safe space for both people to engage in the conversation.
So I completely agree with you. I think that's how I would also approach conversations, right? Like you want to have intent, you want to have ground rules, you want to make it clear, right?
Yeah.
However, you also use the word natural in the start. Now, to me, this doesn't sound natural. And I think not just me, a lot of people would think about this as not being natural, right, Chris? Like a
Mhm.
conversation needs to be natural. Like you and I are talking and we're just talking about the weather, we're talking about Boston, we're talking about the Netherlands, and now we're starting talking about this. It feels a little bit more natural. But if you
Yeah.
start with the ground rules, it's like, hey, okay, and I also just recently listened to this in a podcast that if you want to have a difficult conversation, you start off by actually saying that, look, this is going to be difficult and I don't know how I would come off, but this is how I feel. But that to me personally sounds literally the opposite of natural. You are
Hmm.
actually you are actually designing the conversation in a way, right? You're actually building a guardrails around it so that yeah, you and the other person can actually have a good conversation. But
Yeah.
is that what conversations were always supposed to be, Chris?
I think
Experimented?
it depends. I always tell people it depends on the who you're talking to, as well as the severity of that conversation. So if I'm talking with my wife, I don't necessarily need to set ground rules. We've been together long enough that like if I just start the conversation or she starts the conversation, we know what's up. If
Yeah.
I'm starting with a good friend that I've been friends with, one of my best friends for like 20 years,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily need to set ground rules because we know each other, we know what's up, and we know that we have each other's best interests. So the weaker that relationship, the more you're going to want to think, okay, this it's more important to maybe set some foundation so they know I'm coming from a good place. Otherwise, yeah, you want to be natural, but otherwise they're going to feel like on the defensive, and that's not going to be very helpful. Also, if it's a super serious conversation, like we're talking about infidelity or we're talking about, something like super serious or finances, right? Versus, hey, when you did this in front of our kid, that wasn't great. I didn't feel respected as a parent. That's maybe that like
Yeah.
lower stakes. That's the, like lower stakes. You don't have to stress as much about that.
Yeah.
But the higher the stakes, the more you'll want to put guardrails around it because you don't want it to go off the rails. You don't want it to veer into personal attacks, and you want to make sure that everybody feels safe in the conversation, right? that's just as important as making it feel natural.
Yeah. So in your practice, which are we're going to talk about it in a while. I usually try to plug it in
Sure.
the middle so that people actually
Yeah.
understand you beforehand. But like in your practice, you deal with relationships as well as workplace stuff. So is there an
Yeah.
example of a relationship session? Not I don't want to know the specifics, but like what was the
Yeah.
problem that you tried to solve, and what was the problem that they were having in terms of the communication they were
Yeah.
doing, and what could be the solution for it?
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday. It was about a person who needed to talk to her mom about getting either into a nursing home or getting assisted kind of in-home care because her
Yeah.
mom was getting older. She's a widow. She can't drive anymore really by herself. And this person lived at least 8 hours away in a different state. So
Yeah.
she couldn't just go anytime to go help anytime that
Yeah.
the mom needed help. And so it was a hard conversation because the mom's been independent for a long time. And how do you have that conversation?
Yeah.
Especially, I think culturally that also brings up a lot of different things, right? Because I don't know about your culture specifically, but in Chinese culture, it's not as common for older family members to be in the nursing home. It's they live with the kids or somebody of the younger generation.
Yeah.
So it's a weird conversation to have in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of that conversation that I was helping her with was really learn more about the mom's concerns or fears. Try to figure out
Yeah.
exactly what she's worried about. What is it about those kind of places or that kind of new lifestyle that she's really upset about? Is it the loss of independence? Is it the loss of privacy? Is it
Yeah.
the fear of just the recognition, like, okay, this means I'm getting older. This is like a
Yeah.
clear sign that I'm getting older and closer to death, right?
Yeah.
And that's a tough pill for a lot of people to think about. Similar, like if you create a will, that's like a big step for a lot of people to like start
Yeah.
thinking about their death. But what is it? We don't know. And if you don't know, you can't properly talk through what that concern is and problem solve with her. So that was a
Yeah.
lot of it, is learning how to not like go in there with like, I know best for you, I care about you, because that's already there and that's true. But let's think about what's really going on for your mom, what's really happening for
Yeah.
her, that's making her so upset about this.
Yeah, indeed. I think what you're mentioning is like you want to match their emotions, right? Because the biggest problem with communication is that, as you said, one person might have the best intentions, and one person might actually know what's better for them. Sure, we are not denying that, but
Yeah.
the other person doesn't want to know what's best for them. They want to know, do you hear them? Do you know that you understand them? So
Yeah.
it's the same as these days. I'm quite obsessed with the democracy and voting
Mm.
rights, all of that stuff. And I'm trying to concoct, like the word is concoct or make up in a way.
Mm.
I'm trying to make up a new ideal, and I'm like, okay, how can we fix this? And I read something very beautiful. It said democracy is not good because it works. It's just good because it gives access to everybody. So
Mm. Yeah.
having the most efficient policy making is not the basis of democracy. So same here, having the best thought or the best action point or the best solution that can come out of a conversation is not the goal of the conversation, actually, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's quite interesting.
It's really about creating that deeper relationship, because if somebody else feels heard, seen, understood, that's really that human connection that you were talking about. Like, is the whole point of this
Mm.
podcast is how do you create that deeper social connection? Is you have to have deep you have to have these difficult conversations where you feel seen and heard by another person. They feel seen, heard, and understood.
Yeah.
You get to know each other on a deeper level. Like that's part of it, or that's the foundation of it.
Indeed, indeed. And now I want to talk a little bit about, of course, who Chris is, because the first few moments is just to go directly into it, have a real life demonstration of who Chris is. But now we want to talk about who actually Chris is, what Chris does, and whatever you are like, whatever defines you as a person,
Hmm.
Chris. So I want to talk about your practice. I want to talk about what your experience is. I want to talk about whatever you've done so far to come where you are, and why are you
Yeah.
doing what you're doing.
Wow, what a broad question. That's a broad question. So let's start professionally. I'll start professionally, then I'll go back into personal, because that
Yeah,
influences why I'm doing what I'm doing.
yeah,
So I'm a licensed therapist, and so I was a licensed therapist for many years, got burnt out, and I moved into learning and development because I wanted to keep having an impact in the world around me. So if I was training people to do skills and to help other people, that's great.
Yeah.
And then eventually that evolved into doing leadership development because I was realizing that when people leave a training, they forget like 50% of everything they learned. And
Yeah.
so I was realizing leaders are really where it's at. The leaders who are there every day, coaching, having those difficult conversations, setting the culture, they're the ones that can have a much more direct impact than I could on the outside. And so that's what I've been doing since right before the pandemic, right before COVID.
Okay.
And then this past June, I got laid off. And so I had been building a practice on the side, doing executive coaching and consulting. So I decided, you know what? I want to do this and have a bigger impact. I want to be able to,
Yeah.
because when I was working internally, it was just, my internal corp organization. But now I'm able to work with lots of different nonprofits. And so I focus on nonprofits, helping leaders have difficult conversations, master difficult relationships with their organization, the culture, with their boards, so that
Yeah.
they can have the impact they want to have. And I I was realizing like that in my journey of creating this is I realized that it's because like I grew up in a culture that didn't talk about difficult conversations at all. Like emotions were like ignored. Don't talk about emotions. The only emotions are happy and do your homework. Those are the emotions I'm allowed to have. And so it was so odd when I suddenly went to college and people are, I'm learning about different people's backgrounds and things like that and having to have more hard conversations. But
Yeah.
then I started working in mental health, and that's nothing but hard conversations all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a therapist, I got into a specialty where I was working with sex offenders, and so that's not talking about sex, which is a really hard topic
Yeah.
with adolescents. And in my culture, again, I was raised in a family we don't talk about sex either.
Yeah. Indeed.
So, and you're shaking your head like you know what's up, you know what's
Yeah.
going on. So
Indeed.
all of this was like learning how to have difficult conversations, like on personal topics, having difficult conversations with government agencies to negotiate levels of care and
Yeah.
different contracts to with senior leaders as I was starting to grow in the organization and start
Yeah.
pushing initiatives forward. How do I negotiate different needs and expand my influence? And so I just love this topic because I was doing a lot of reflecting and thinking I've done this so much out of necessity, and like I've had to get better at it because I just happened to be
Yeah.
put in positions where I had to get better at it or else I would just fail at what I was doing.
Yeah.
So I know that lots of other people can also benefit from this because man, a lot of people I'm sure or I've learned is like a lot of people grew up like me. We didn't have difficult conversations.
Yeah.
We're not assertive. We weren't taught to be assertive.
Yeah.
And so we don't know how to be assertive or hold our own values or hold beliefs and be in a respectful way and still build that relationship. And so I've loved the journey that I'm on, and I've loved being able to have these conversations about difficult conversations.
Well, indeed, I resonate with you a lot due to the fact of your cultural influence,
Mm,
because as I was agreeing with you in the past, I also was raised in a similar environment. So Chinese culture is quite similar to our Asian culture, South Asian culture of India, Pakistan as well, right?
mm,
Where you don't talk about stuff, you listen to
yeah,
authority, you have to defer to authority, you are not able
yeah,
to talk about all the taboo topics, you're not allowed to talk about anything, just get successful somehow, and all that success always relies on either being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and
yeah,
from
yeah.
there just take it from there, and then you see you have it. And the interesting part is when you do grow old, I do not know if that's the same in your culture and in your experience, but when you do grow old, then suddenly you start getting more passes and more freedom to then have a conversation that you want to have. But still not
Mm,
with those people who you were raised with, but with other people. But now you are allowed to do those things. So, for example, my sister, of course, being a woman in that kind of a culture was for difficult for her. She was restricted in a way. But now,
mhm.
after she got married, she suddenly got a free pass. Like, if you and your
Yeah,
husband are on board, do whatever you want to do. And I'm like, yeah, but why can't you do that beforehand? Why can't you have those conversations of creating an independent person beforehand so that they become an independent person before they meet someone else? And instead of being independent and co creating, they're basically latching on to someone because they were
right.
first latching on to you. And you can't blame them because
That's right.
that's what they were raised with, right? So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is that you do focus mostly on people who are in those similar situations, who were raised to be not independent of sorts, have been very dependent on cultures that they are. So
Mhm.
how do you teach them to become a little bit more independent just through the means of communication or conversation?
I think a lot of it is learning what their own values are. I've worked with lots of people who have this had this myth of being assertive is the same as being aggressive. So they had to like be loud, yell, talk over other people, force other people to believe what they believe. And granted, because that's what their experiences were, either from, how they grew up and how they viewed authority, or they just watched a lot of movies and TV shows and got their vision from that.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not, for a lot of people, that's not our natural instinct to be aggressive and in your face and things like that. But our values are still, we care about other people. We want to be compassionate. We want to have harmony and agreement. You could do all those things. And so once they start realizing that and realizing that it's okay to still be that way and be assertive, or they can still hold people accountable, and that's not a bad thing. That's not being mean. That makes a big difference.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
I do understand what you were saying, and I really, really liked the element of what they saw in movies. And I really want to take the
Mm,
conversation in that direction. So
sure. Yeah.
a lot of that we learn is, as you said, from our parents, from our culture, the way we are raised. But a subset of what we learn is actually from these things like movies and social
Hmm.
media that teaches us a lot of things. And what scares me is because of that, sometimes we are losing our own values or we're being
Mm.
influenced to do things which might not feel good for us individually or societally, but we don't see it bleeding into our culture. A very good example is blue jeans, right? Like blue
Yeah.
jeans is the testament of American globalization. That okay, everyone in the world wears blue jeans now, and they made it into part of their culture. You go to China, people are wearing blue jeans. You go to India, Pakistan, people are wearing blue jeans. But slowly, slowly, a lot of other things also started embedding into these things. A good example of this would be I was discussing this with a friend of mine. Do you know about Henry Cavill, the guy who plays Superman?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So 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 recently he came out saying, I don't understand the concept of sex scenes in movies. He's like, I don't understand
Hmm.
the concept of it. I don't understand the value it adds. Oh, look, two naked people, great. And
Hmm. Yeah.
I was so shocked because for years I've been thinking about this. For years I've been telling my wife, I don't get why movies need to have sex scenes. I don't get the value it's adding, especially if it's not a
Hmm.
romantic movie about anything, right? You know, if it's a movie about sex being integral to something, sure. But if not, then what is the purpose? People argue sexual liberalization. Sure.
Yeah.
But what value does that add to the movie? I need to know that. And I need to know
I
that.
have
And
a
now I
partial
see.
answer for that.
Yeah, I
I
want to
actually
hear
have a
it.
partial answer.
Yeah.
I think I actually just read about this the other day. Is
Yeah.
back in the 80s and early 90s, having an R rating or having like that more adult rating was seen as more valuable by movie
Yeah.
studios. So you'll see lots of movies that added in random nudity or sex scenes to get that R rating so they could be
Mike.
seen as more popular. So I think so that's a partial answer. I don't know why it continued that way after that.
Yeah.
But I know that that's why, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like that was like a valuable thing for movies to get to.
So at least that adds some value to the conversation. That is because of not in the movie, but something outside of the movie. Because it really,
Yeah,
it's the same as the adult film industry, right? It's the same that those things influence the younger generation, and
yeah,
it influences us quite directly, let alone indirectly. We just don't want to accept it. A lot of people look at adult films as the way to actually have intimate relationships, and you're like, but
yeah,
that doesn't even make sense. They look at
right.
movies to fascinate about themselves. Right now in India, there is this craze by this one director who's really famous, and he's creating movies about this toxic man. This
Hmm.
typical toxic man, a Chinese man from the 50s, a Pakistani man from the 50s. You know what I'm talking about? A man who
Yeah,
says wife should know, the woman should know her roles, macho,
right,
all
right,
of those
right.
kind of things. And the movies are being celebrated all around South Asia. They're loving it.
Hmm.
This guy is bushy, burly, crazy, hitting people everywhere, taking women by the hand, telling them, you know, you need me. And the woman somehow just gets mesmerized by that
Just
power.
so interesting.
And and I know what they're trying to do. The younger people are looking at it and be like, is that the ideal man I want to have? So I want to
Hmm.
have that conversation. I want to have how influence really affects us and how we can take back influence and how we can take back control of influence in the communication and the conversation that we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting conversation because like one of my goals is physically I want to look like The Rock. I want to be 6'4". I want to be
Really?
240 pounds. Like that's one of my like fitness goals is to get that big. It'll never happen because I'm 5'8". I don't know if I can grow that that height ever in my life. But it's a dream, It's
Yeah,
but it's certainly impacted by like who we see in movies, who we see in TV shows.
yeah,
Um, yeah, that's such an interesting. And there's like whole fields of study devoted to just that idea of like how popular media is influencing all of us and
yeah.
changes the way we think. And so, yeah, how do we change that? I don't know. When somebody solves that problem, I'll be happy because I have two young kids. You have a new kid, so you get the idea. Like they're going to be consuming all this media.
It's scary. It's scary.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about conversations and communication in terms of our influence, it's also so automated. Although it is by
Mm,
design like that, but like
yeah.
how by design conversations are not optimal. We just talked about that, right? By design conversations are going to be messy. If you don't put guardrails, if you don't put ground rules, if you don't engineer a conversation, it can get out of hand, right?
That's
To
right.
really
Right.
reach the value you want to reach. But the same goes for these things. If you don't engineer the influence around you, if you don't control the environment around you, it can get out of hand pretty fast because people are betting money that they can control you and your actions and your behaviors rather than you controlling theirs. Because for conversation and for influence, the concept is the same. They want to sell you stuff. They want to tell you to do stuff. Your boss wants to tell you to do stuff. Your partner who is abusive wants you to do some stuff. Your
Yeah.
company wants you to buy some stuff. Social media wants you to do look like some stuff. So it's always people trying to control your actions, and you want to take back that control. And I feel like, as you mentioned, communication and conversation is the first line because, like listening, awareness is so important. That is the first step to know actually you are in a problem itself, right? You are in a digital
Mhm.
pentagon of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
wanna take over that. So I'm really really curious about that conversation, but we'll try to park it on the
Well,
side
can
because
I
we want
can
to.
I add something to that?
Yeah,
If
definitely.
it's okay, there's a concept. I don't know if you've heard this idea. I don't have a name for it, but it's the idea that nowadays, like we really people really value their freedom and like don't want to be controlled. They want to be able to access whatever media they want, do whatever you want, and like any restriction on that is seen as either oppressive or hurtful, or you just don't care about them, whatever it may
Yeah,
be. And there's a metaphor where let's say you live on a busy street and you have young kids and you don't have a fence. If you let them play however they want to play, they could easily run into the street and get hurt,
yeah,
right? So that's hard, right? But if you put a fence and now you can let them go play and that you don't have to be worried about them getting hurt, but they don't realize that because they can't see like the bigger picture. So I think I wonder if there's like there's a reality of like we do have to put some control in place, and it might seem like yes, we are restricting them a little bit, people, whether little kids or not. Overall, though, you got to think like, what's the overall bigger picture? Are we protecting you from some other bigger harm that's hurtful? And it's hard to for adults, it's hard to tell us that because we work so hard to get our freedom and to
yeah,
think we know what we're doing. To
yeah.
then suddenly put guardrails on, it seems like you're trying to stop us from doing stuff.
Exactly. And I really like where you're going with this because we want to believe that we know what's best for us, right? That's what we
Mm,
are. Basically, when we
yeah,
graduate into adulthood, we feel like that's one of the bonuses we get, that hey, now I know what I'm doing with my life, or I'm supposed to do
yeah,
this. No, but that's not true. A lot of us don't know what we're doing. A lot of us are figuring it out as we go, and if you leave an open society like that, it is going to be more crazy because
hmm
the people, it's the same. This is also controversial. It's the same as, I personally believe, not anyone can be a parent, right? And
right.
just like your analogy of children and a street and a fence in the middle, my analogy of parenthood goes like, do you give someone, just because someone can afford a car, can you let them buy a car and drive?
Mm,
They're gonna be a threat to themselves and to others because they don't know
yeah,
how to drive. Like that, just because someone can afford to be a parent and wants to be a parent, is that reason enough for them to be a parent? Right?
yeah,
And I'm not saying you just restrict them, but you should provide education, you should provide support, you should provide these things because
right.
you need them, and as a society, you need to do that. But imagine you're trying to control us from having babies. No, we're not trying to control you from having babies. We're trying to tell you that if you do these things, you're going to be a more efficient parent. You need to learn those
Right.
things. What our parents used to teach us, now we need to learn from the government, because the family structure is broken. We don't live with our parents anymore, so they don't pass on that knowledge to us.
Mm,
So similar to what you're saying about
yeah.
society, similar concept. A lot of people have become individuals in this day and age, right, Chris?
Yeah.
And the biggest
Yeah.
benefit of individuality is you know what you're talking about now. You're like, hey, I'm an individual. My actions may have consequences on other people, but they're not me. So I can do
Yeah.
whatever the hell I want. But no, that's not how societies work. Societies work in compromise, in collaboration.
Right.
So you
That's
need
right.
to collaborate together, and a lot of people forget that. When I heard your analogy, when I heard your conversation, what I really thought of was the paradox of tolerance. A tolerant
Mm,
society can only be intolerance of intolerance itself, and that doesn't make
yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
right?
I've heard that. I've heard that
Yeah.
before. Yeah.
And that is the problem, Chris. We are losing essence of how society needs to function, especially in the West. You're talking from the States, I'm talking from the Netherlands, and we do see this happening here. And I think going back to
Mm,
what this whole thing is about, conversations and communication is, in my eyes, the tools of the trade that you need in order to break into this society and try to make sense of it, try to make everyone understand this, that hey, let's have conversations, let's understand why you feel hurt, that your freedom is
yeah.
being restricted, why do you feel panicked. And this is an interesting moment. Chris, you have had a lot of difficult conversations with a lot of difficult people. How do you see us rebuilding that concept of community that you might have had in China, I might have had in Pakistan? I do not know how much in the past you were in China, how most of your life you lived in China or you didn't. But
No,
oh, you were born and raised in the
I was born
States.
in the U.S., so
Oh, okay. And
never.
you've never been to China either.
I visited Hong Kong a few times, but that's
Okay,
about it.
okay. So then you are not, well, in a way you are, because you still live with your parents, if you did live with your parents. But like there's this culture, a close knit culture, and yes, it can seem
Yeah.
suffocating at times, because I lived in that culture. I know it's very suffocating. It's like, oh my God, I
Right.
don't want to.
Yeah.
I want to live here. I want to get out. But once you are out and when you see the individualistic life the West really offers you, you just go like, you know what? It would have been nice to also have the comfort embrace of a society that is there for you, and that's missing. And I want to create that society again, Chris. So how would I go about, in your experience, if I want to create that society with the people around me? What kind of conversation would I want to have?
Yeah. That's my one of my favorite topics, building community, because both me and my wife, we don't live close to our family. And so when you suddenly have kids, suddenly becomes much more noticeable. Like, oh, I don't have like a built-in community.
Like, oh
Um,
yes.
so so we're part of a church, which helps, but it's still not like the same as having, she grew up with her grandmother right across the street and her
My
aunts
God.
like
Yes.
right around the corner. So like it was easy to like hang out with them all the time, like built-in kind of community child
Yeah.
rearing, right? And so when we had started having kids, we were like, we want to be really intentional about building community.
Yeah.
And number one, I'll say we were really fortunate. The house that we bought, we just happened to have a neighborhood full of people who had kids around the same age. So that was like very lucky. Like not everybody's going to
Yeah.
get that. And we
Yeah.
all just get along too. So that's also
Yeah.
very lucky. We hear lots of, there's plenty of stories of like terrible neighbors or HOAs
Yeah.
that are like insufferable. So one of the things that I love doing is building community. So I love inviting groups of people over, not even based upon similar belief, but just groups of people who could do an activity together.
Yeah.
So for a long time we would do monthly dinners where every
Uh,
once a month we would invite people that to join us, like families to join us, and
yeah.
each month we would increase the guest list
Ah,
until we got to like a point where we couldn't sustain that like number of
yeah.
people. And the only requirement was let's go based on geography. So like we'll start with our neighbors, and then we'll start with any other people from our church community that is
Yeah.
also nearby. And so that like naturally created a mix of people, right? Because it's really just
Yeah.
based on geography, which is the way it should be of
Yeah.
building a community, like who's right there around you.
Yeah.
And that was really from our point of view, it was really successful. We loved doing it. People loved getting to know each other and meet each other, and it wasn't about whether you are this faith or that faith. It was just we just all love eating dinner. A bunch
Yeah.
of us have kids. We can all commiserate about child rearing at the same time, or we could talk about movies. So like we were able to find common interests. So a lot of it is
Yeah.
finding common interests, finding common activities. And I think a lot of I think part of that individuality that you mentioned is learning to be vulnerable. So one of the things I had to learn was when people asked me to help me with something, I like my instinct to say no, 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 I can do it. You just enjoy and relax the party or relax and enjoy the
Yeah.
event. But that actually doesn't help build a community or build
Yeah.
relationships. So
Yeah.
allowing them to help when people feel helpful, they feel more connected to you.
Yeah.
And when I let them do that, I also feel more connected to them and I help
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah.
part of that was when I needed help, I would just ask for help, even if I felt like doing it myself. When they asked to help clean up, I would say, okay, yeah, you could do this, you could do that.
Yeah.
Or can we bring anything? Yeah, bring this, bring that. Even though I want to provide everything,
Yeah.
it's that part of that is they feel more engaged in that group if they can help provide stuff for it, as opposed to just a consumer, right? Instead of
Yeah.
just like they're not going to movie theater,
Yeah.
they're actually part of this event. And so
Indeed.
creating parts where people can really participate and uh, and what's that word? Participate and contribute and
Yeah.
be a member of it, the more they'll feel connected to it, and they don't have to feel like just like a customer of that
Yeah.
event.
Indeed, I agree with you 100%. A lot of times what people want is belonging, and you only
Yeah.
belong if you add value, right? If you bring
Mm,
something to the table, because that's how you measure. That's the evolutionary way of measuring worth. To be honest,
yeah.
it's not our fault. It's how we're engineered. If you
Yeah.
would bring
Yeah.
food back to your camp, they would like you. If you would bring weapons or tools back to your camp, they would like you. If you would save someone from something, they would like you. So it was always bringing something to the table as adds your value as a human being. And
Yeah.
sure, it's outdated, sure, but our brains do not work like technology. They're not running this fast. We still are geared to our
Right.
those things. So I agree with you 100% that we need to invite them in and make themselves feel useful, because the more useful feel
Yeah.
they feel, the more they would feel like a community. And I also resonate with what you said about you don't want them to help, and not just because you're the host of the party, but just because for me personally, what I resonate was that because that's who I am as a person. I am quite
Yeah.
self-sufficient, but
Right.
I cannot be self-sufficient. That's a myth. But I want to believe that I'm self-sufficient. So whenever we also have parties, and just like you in your case, our Afghan. So my wife, I'm Pakistani, but my wife is Afghan. But our cultures are quite
Yeah.
similar. When they have parties, they are quite aggressive with the hosting.
Mm.
They're like sit, relax. We're gonna do everything. There's gonna be 5 course meal, and I'm like, yeah, but
Mm.
who's gonna eat this afterwards? We're gonna give it away to everybody. I'm like, yeah, but then why are you making all of this effort? They're like, no, we
Yeah.
need to. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm a big fan of that. Let's make food and give it away to people. Fine, no problem. But then the cleaning needs to be done, right? And I'm like, okay, let's clean. But
Yep.
no, you're not allowed to ask for help. No one sit there, drink all the tea we made you, all the sweets we made you, and let us clean. So now in a party of 4 hours, we ate for 2 hours, then we clean for 1 hour while the guests are just sitting alone for 1 hour
Just
talking to
yeah.
each other. And then the last 1 hour we come back to talk to them, but we're so tired from all the cleaning that we just and the guests are also like bored because they're just stopping among us themselves, but they're waiting for you to come because you're the host.
Exactly.
And you're like, wait, I'm just cleaning up and everything. So I finally convinced my wife that it's okay that all the messes on the dinner table, we just move them to the lounge. Let's have a conversation with them, let them go home, and then I will clean the whole thing. But let
Yeah.
us do that first. And if you don't want to ask for help, let us do this first. At least let's try to make them feel like they're part of the conversation rather than us in the table and in the kitchen and they're here.
Yeah.
The second element, of course, is to help them come along and clean with us. But I'm not there yet.
Well, I'm interested in Afghan culture. If it was like a family event, like just the only guests were your close family, like your siblings and your
Yeah.
parents, would you still treat them that same way?
Yes, they
So
do.
that's interesting.
They do. It's beyond me. I am always confused
Yeah.
because my wife has her sister's family, her mom here with us. So when we invite them, it's mostly them. Sometimes we also invite their cousins and everything. Of course, then it's a non-negotiable because they're extended family. But even if
Yeah.
it's
Right.
family, no, her mom forces herself into the kitchen because that's what moms do. That's what I love about her. So they just force her. They're like,
Yeah.
no, I'm here. I'm gonna help. But everyone else is just sitting and they try to help, but we're like, no, no, just sit there and everything. So yeah, it is difficult, Chris. I don't know if you have had that kind of a feeling in your family events.
I don't know if you'll let your kid watch Bluey. Have you heard of that show, Bluey? It's an Australian cartoon. Really, really awesome show. You
Yeah,
should watch it.
yeah,
But there's an episode where they're having a it's two girls,
Yeah.
6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and the 6-year-old's having a birthday party, so they're having all their friends over and all that stuff. And the grandmother is there, and she wants to help, but everybody keeps telling her, "No, you relax. It's okay. We got everything."
Yeah.
But like that episode showed me more than anything else. Like nobody there is her friends, and just like you, she spent her entire life helping and doing stuff for the party, and now she's suddenly not asked to do anything, which is weird. So I thought about like that really crystallized for me. Like, you know, we are used to this now because we're in that mode of like we're the ones hosting.
Yeah.
But one day we won't be hosting and we won't know any of the people there. So like who are we gonna relax with? Who are we gonna talk to?
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing to let people do what they do best, which and
Yeah.
they want to do is helping people. So
Helping
let's
people.
let them do
Yeah.
it. Let's let them come in and help.
Yeah, indeed. I never thought of it that way because you are only thinking from your lens, right? You're like, hey, I want to provide, I want to support, I want to do
Yeah.
that as a parent. But yeah, you want to ask for help. And this happened to me quite recently as well, Chris. Mondays are my baby days. My wife is
Mm,
working and I'm in charge of the baby because it's my off day. And then Friday is her off day. So she takes care of the baby while I'm working. And Sunday as well, she went to a party. So Sunday, Monday was back to back baby days,
yeah.
and it was quite intense because I actually found newfound respect for our mothers. I do not know about your side,
Yeah.
but
That's right.
our parents and our mothers specifically were homemakers, right? So not just taking care of the baby, but also taking care of the house.
Yeah.
So Sunday and Monday, I had to take care of my baby. I had to clean the house. I had to cook, and I was broken by the end of the day. But then Monday I woke up and I had to do the whole thing again. So I would do it every Monday. And I've never felt this bad. I was like, hey, you know what? It's doable. Hey, I'm a dad.
Yeah.
This is a new age. It's doable. But then
Yeah.
I did back to back Sunday and Monday. And I was broken at the end of Monday. My wife literally looked at me. She was like, I feel so bad for you. I do not know what has happened to you. You're so gloomy. I'm like, I'm just so tired. And today I'm back up and my energy is back up because her mother was here to
Yeah.
support us. And Tuesday and Wednesday, her mother is here. So we have much more space. I had more headspace. I worked. I did my podcasts. Took a nap. I went to work out. And now it suddenly feels so fresh. And I'm like, my God,
Yeah.
the energy that it takes, a baby takes from you. And that's why you want to ask for help. You want to ask
Yeah.
for help. You want other people to come and help you because it's also good for you. It's not just good
Exactly.
for them, it's also good for you.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. I had that on Saturday. My wife was at an event all day, and so I had my two kids, and they weren't bad. Like they're not bad kids. It's just a lot. They just have so many needs, and they just have so many things going on. Like I had to shuttle between gymnastics and lunch and nap time, and it's just a lot to juggle. And so, like, yeah, I was like, man, I don't know how my mom did it. This is
It's
wild.
Yeah, and actually, I my theory behind it actually was this, Chris, going back to our conversation about community, that our parents, mom specifically, yes, she was like a super mom. My mom had 4 kids. How did she do it is beyond me. But then I realized,
Yeah.
oh yeah, she had her community with her, which I don't. And that's something I
Mm,
use as a comeback whenever she asks me. She's like, raising kids is not
mm,
easy. I'm like, you don't get to say it. Your mom was right next door. You had 3 sisters,
yeah.
and all of them were helping us out. Like I remember when I was young, my older brother and sister was not even in the house with me. I was like, where are they? And they're like, they're at grandmother's. So they're next door at grandmother's, where all my aunts are taking
Yeah.
care of her, and my mom is taking care of me and my little one, little brother. And suddenly it becomes more manageable because you
Yeah.
distribute the child rearing, as you mentioned. As a community, you do that, and you miss that
Right.
because yes, you in your community, for example, you would trust them. Sure, you love them. Your community is great, you would trust them to look after your child as a babysitter, sure, but it's not the same as looking after a baby or looking after
Right.
a personal growth of a kid that a grandmother would
Right.
do or
Right.
an
Right.
uncle would do. And I just miss that living abroad after so many years. And as you said,
Yeah.
once I had kids, then it hit me that my God, this is not
Yep.
here. My support system is not here. And how do I build that now?
Yeah. And I think you can. It depends on the people you live with, and like if like we're trying to build it here because we all have our neighborhood because we all have
Yeah.
kids in the same age, so like we're like
Yeah.
on the same page. But at any point, somebody could just move.
Yeah.
Like somebody could just like say, "I got a new job. I got to move. Sorry."
Yeah, exactly. And you put all that effort in. And
Right.
that's also has become this is also a digression, but that these are all the different types of conversations I think people would love to hear. That you are also in this day and age of individuality. You start talking about community and friendship also in this effort
Mm,
manner, right? Like it's like,
yeah,
oh, but I don't want to put in too much effort because you can leave at any point. Yeah, but people always
yeah,
leave. That's human nature. So will you never build friendships? Now people don't. They're like, I don't want to put in the effort. Let's keep
you're
it
right. Some people
superficial.
don't. Yeah,
Yeah, because I don't want you to leave. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe that person would leave because they feel it's superficial, or even if it's deeper, then even if they leave, it shouldn't break or something. My wife has her best friend lives 2.5 hours away from us. That's where she went on
mm,
Sunday, and her daughter and my daughter are almost the same age, so like a couple of months of a difference. So they're
yeah,
already planning for them to be besties. I'm like, you guys
nice,
live like 2.5 hours away. How are they gonna be besties? They're like, they're
close
gonna be
enough.
besties. Don't worry about it. So you need to put in the effort. I feel
Right.
like they do. They talk to each other very rarely, like once a month or something, but somehow they're
Mm,
connected, and
yeah,
it's just beautiful to see.
yeah, yeah. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, I wish we could create that. But yeah, it's hard these
It is
days.
hard. It is, and your all of your family doesn't live near you, not just your parents, but all of your family.
Um, yeah, a lot. My cousin actually lives maybe like an hour away. Well,
Yeah,
no, I would say without traffic, he lives like maybe 20 minutes away. With traffic, it's an hour, or regular
yeah,
traffic is an hour. So yeah, we don't get to see him as much. He has like a kid that's like in between our two kids' age,
yeah,
so it'd be great to see him more.
yeah,
We just aren't that close enough.
yeah.
And then my mom's theoretically moving up here this year, which will help a lot
Oh,
because she
that would
lives
be
by
nice.
herself. So it'll be nice to have her nearby, and I
Yeah,
don't have to worry about her like in a house by herself. So
yeah. I really think that adds value. I do not know if you followed that show on Netflix called The Blue Zones, I think. It's basically
no,
about the places where the most centurions live, the people who have centenarians, the people who have
mm,
actually lived up to 100 per capita. So it's places like Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan,
mm,
Greece, one island in Greece, one island in Italy, one small city in San Francisco, like in California somehow. Very weirdly, that was pretty shocking to me.
mm,
But these places are where the most centenarians live, and almost all of them say that what really keeps us happy and what keeps us alive is the sense of belonging and community, sense of being
mm,
feeling wanted. And when you move to assisted living, when you move to those kind of retirement homes, you don't feel wanted anymore. You just feel like, hey, I'm
yeah,
here. I will just now live my life here. No, but if your
that's right.
mother is next door and she has a reason to cook, she has a reason to visit the grandkids, she has a reason to
Yes,
go shopping, it adds a lot of value. My wife's mother and my mother as well all the time just wants to buy stuff for my daughter, and of course you don't want that. You're like, hey, I'm here,
yeah,
I'm the
yeah,
parent, I can manage it. But and it doesn't feel like it's like you can't afford it. But they want to do something, so it takes really it's like a muscle you need to learn to
I
let
know.
people help you, because that also enables you to help them
Hmm. Yeah,
in a way, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. I gotta check that out on Netflix.
Oh, it's a good
Right?
show.
You said
It's a good show.
Netflix?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's called The Blue
Okay.
Zones. It was a very interesting conversation. But let's move towards closing this conversation, Chris. I think I had a lot of fun here. I feel like you're a
Yeah.
guy I can talk to hours about. So
Yeah, this was
that's
great. I
always
love this conversation.
that's great. Before we close up, I want to just give you the floor if you want to talk about anything, if you have anything that you want to share with us, if you have anything that you want to mention. This is the time to do so, and then we shall close the conversation.
Yeah. I think the best things to talk about is I also have a podcast, The Art and
Yeah.
Science of Difficult Conversations,
Oh, very
where we talk
nice.
about how to have difficult conversations and then we role play different scenarios. So that's what we were doing yesterday, how to have a conversation with a mother who needs care. So we did that. We recorded that one yesterday. You should probably be on the pod. It'd be great to have you on there.
Oh, I would love to be on the podcast. I think those are the kind of places and conversations I really want to have. So I would
Yeah.
love to be on ours. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll email you after this.
Good.
So the art and science of difficult conversations, you can catch that everywhere you catch podcasts. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Really, that's the best place to follow me. I'm not on Instagram. I am on Instagram, but I don't know how to use it. So you can just find me on LinkedIn, Chris Wong,
Chris,
LMHC.
you don't look that old. You don't look that old.
I tried to stay away from that on purpose.
Ah,
Um,
okay, okay.
so it's on purpose. I tried to stay away, but
Yeah.
I have Facebook, I have Reddit,
Oh, yeah,
but
Facebook. That explains a lot because I'm also Facebook generation, and
yeah,
everyone makes fun of me because I'm young still. But they go like, Are you still on Facebook? No one uses Facebook anymore. I'm like, yeah, well, we do in Pakistan. It's still pretty big. So
Yeah.
Instagram and TikTok and all of these things are really for the young generation. But I'm like, I'm still like on Facebook. I use it
Yeah,
rarely
I
as
think
well. I agree with you, but
yeah, I think
it's still there.
Facebook's good to just keep my family and friends like updated on like what we're doing. Really, it's more. It's I guess it's kind of like Instagram in that sense, where like I just post photos of like a birthday party or like a fun family trip we just went on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very nice. So that's great to hear. I would love to know some tips about LinkedIn because I'm also trying to grow there, but it's so difficult
Yeah,
to have a conversation on LinkedIn, especially because everyone just wants to. Again, I think this is so beautiful that you mentioned it. LinkedIn is the type of place that we really want to fix as communicators, right? Because it's all about just talking about yourself. It's all about like, hey, look
yeah,
at this. Listen to me. I have this idea. And you're like, yeah,
yeah,
great.
yeah,
And then you go to other people's posts and then you start sharing your ideas again on their posts. You're like, hey, by the way, nice post. I would like to add this to it. And I'm like, yeah, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know it's become a weird atmosphere, but I still use it mainly. And I'll tell you what, I'll tell you the truth. I really use it as like a big business card, so that like
yeah.
if someone's talking to me, they're like, I want to work with Chris. They can look me up on LinkedIn and say, okay, Chris is a real person. He really exists. He really knows what he's talking about. I can trust that.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
That's
ever
that is
expect like I don't know if anyone will ever look at my LinkedIn and say, I look at my LinkedIn first and then say, you know what? I gotta work with Chris. I gotta figure out what this guy's all about. So I just use it as a business card. I
yeah.
have a website, myleadershippotential.com. You can catch me there.
Yes.
And you can just always email me, Chris at myleadershippotential.com. I'm always happy to have conversations and chat.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Just we would catch all those links from you, and we'll put it at the end of the podcast, so people can always reach out to you if they want to. So that would be nice.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoyed having you conversation. I really look forward to having conversation with you again.
Yeah,
And
I love this
hope
conversation. It was great talking to you.
great talking to you as well. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I will talk to you next time. See you later. Bye bye.